All right, I have 11 o'clock Eastern Time, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for those of you that have joined. My name is Rob May. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Backupify. We do backup and archiving for cloud-based data, and I'm going to talk a little bit about social media's midnight run. There's three things that you will learn in the presentation today. One is why social media will have an Enron moment. The second is what a regulated social web might look like. And the third is how you can avoid being the next Jeff Skilling. So what is an Enron moment? Basically, it's any highly public, highly damaging event that forces government to enact broad regulatory expansion. Here's a list of some Enron moments that we've seen over the last 100+ years. On the left, you have the event, and on the right, you have the federal regulation, bureaucracy, or body of government that was created as a result. So the Enron moment cycle typically starts when there's new innovation in a market, and that innovation is running ahead of government regulation. The early adopters make a lot of gains. There's a gold rush. Everybody wants to copy the early adopters. The key steps in any Enron moment cycle are to pay attention to number 4 and number 7. So who are the Paul Reveres that start to warn that the new market is unstable and that it's not going to play out the way that everybody thinks? And then after there is an Enron moment and there is more government regulation, the people who heeded those Paul Reveres usually limit their damage and can sometimes actually make some money. So if you look at social media's path to an Enron moment, it really started with social networking, particularly driven by Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, which were the first social platforms to really be adopted en masse, although they are adopted for slightly different uses. There have been a lot of early gains already that we've seen. The Obama campaign in particular was one of the drivers that took social media up to the mainstream. There were tons and tons of articles and stories and case studies written about the way that the campaign used social media to engage a user base, turn out voters, manage fundraising, and really help Obama win the election. So the gold rush is obviously the entire social media industry that's sprung up. Tons of consultants, tons of startup companies, tons of new ideas and new services that are coming out of this industry. In terms of Paul Reveres, FTC and IAB have been good. FINRA has been absolutely fantastic. I think they're probably one of the organizations that is most ahead of the curve when it comes to warning their user base about coming regulations, potential problems with social media. I'll talk a little bit more about what FINRA is doing later. In terms of an Enron moment, we've had a couple things that have come close. WikiLeaks that most of you probably know about, Google Buzz, which you may have heard about. If you don't know the story there was some automatic sharing that was going on in your Google Buzz feed that people weren't aware of. I don't think we've had what I would really consider an Enron moment for social media, but part of the presentation is about why we think that'll happen and then what regulation will be put in place as a result, and whether you survive and thrive will be ultimately depend on how you handle that. So if we look at social media as an innovation, I probably don't have to convince you that it's big. Here are just some basic statistics about the massive adoption of social media. Again, some statistics about growth in Twitter and Facebook over the last couple of years. It was really going back to the Obama campaign and all the attention that it got for using these tools that started to drive this stuff into the mainstream. So let's look at Facebook specifically as an example. With more than 500 million users, half of who log in a given day, lots of connections per friend, lots of community groups, events, and pages going on. The point of this slide is just to convey that this is not going away. This is a new long-term secular trend. It's not it's not a fad. It'll definitely change and take different shapes as we go forward. But I think social media as a concept is always going to be around. So what does that mean? That really means that you can't ignore it. You know, if you look at the logos on this slide, there's so many different types of social media companies. There's so many different applications. There's just massive fragmentation. You're seeing a lot of companies that have sprung up that try to control access to social media. It's very difficult to do. The way that people access these services is very fragmented. They access them from mobile devices, from their phone directly via text, from email, from applications on their phone, from applications on their computers, and then, of course, from the web. So blocking these sites is pretty much impossible. Now, who are the Paul Reveres of social media? Like I said before, I really think FINRA is ahead of the curve in what they're proposing, the value that they're providing to their constituency, and their mantra to date has been archive everything, better to be safe than sorry. And one of the things we'll talk about in a minute is that's a little bit difficult to do. There aren't always a lot of good tools out there, but there are ways to do it. You know, we talk to companies on a regular basis whose current archiving system is to print out screenshots of things and file them in manila folders. The FTC is also doing a good job. They were early to the scene with blogging, which was a very early form of social media, and then IAB has implemented some best practices as well. So previews of social media's Enron. Facebook Beacon, you may remember, was really created a scare about privacy and sharing of information. Google Buzz, which we talked about briefly a few minutes ago. And then WikiLeaks, which most of you know about. We actually had an interesting encounter with WikiLeaks here at Backupify. I have some separate slides to talk about later, and I'll tell you that story. So what does a regulated social web look like? Well, your typical Enron moment fallout is going to bring some regulations into play that specifically dictate activities that you cannot do, forbidden activities. There are also going to be required disclosures that you're going to be required to put into place, and then, of course, reporting to ensure transparency and compliance. Obviously, this is going to drive up costs, and it's one of the things that you have to be prepared for if you want to adopt social media en masse. Now, why is regulation happening? Well, there are really three problems with social media that will cause regulation to ultimately have to step in. Number one is the culture of transparency. So social media is all about sharing everything, not hiding any information, being who you really are, talking about things in the open. And it creates a little bit of a problem because sometimes people, if you want to be successful on social media, it helps to be very transparent. It helps to share jokes. It helps to share sometimes inside knowledge or very personal things. And these may or may not go over very well. So you may have seen a case a while back with the Red Cross where somebody who was supposed to tweet for the Red Cross thought she was tweeting from her personal account something about Dogfish Ale or some kind of beer that she had gotten and that they were going to drink, and that went out on the official Red Cross Twitter feed and caused a little bit of a stir because even though they caught it and deleted the tweet a few minutes later, it had already been retweeted and had started to propagate through Twitter. There was another issue with, I think Kenneth Cole was the brand, that when the Egyptian revolutions started, they made a joke about the, people in Egypt are revolting, it's because our new line came out and they're so excited or something like that. Well, yeah, that might have been funny to some people, but they took they took some licks on Twitter and ultimately had to apologize for sort of making light of what was a very important situation. Secondly, the barriers to sharing are low, so it's very easy to share information, right? In an age when everything had to be printed out and memos went around offices, it was easier to track those documents, secure those documents and communications. Even in a day of when everything was done over phone or done over email, it was a little easier still to put programs in place, software in place that would track what was going on with those communication channels. But social media makes it so easy to share, and the fragmentation of access to the data, the fragmentation of ways that you can share this information are so low. Typically you can just click a button and retweet something or send it to a friend or whatever it may be, that it makes it very easy for somebody to pass information along without using proper judgment as to whether or not that information should be shared, or what kind of second or third order sharing may go on, right? So maybe I send something to a friend, and maybe it's fine for me to send that along, but that friend may not use the best judgment in who he or she sends that information out to. Also, short buzz cycles prevent easy oversight. And I'll give you a particularly personal story here. I used to work at Humana, the health insurance company, a couple of years ago, and Humana really wanted to get more into the blogging world and wanted to be relevant. And so the Innovation Center within Humana really started to adopt blogging. They brought in some consultants. And one of the challenges in blogging and in social media in general is that the buzz cycles are so short, right? People will talk about something for just a few hours, maybe 12 hours, maybe 24 hours at the most, that if you want to be part of the conversation, as they say, you have to engage during the window when the conversation is relevant. So what this meant was Humana's marketing and PR folks like to approve all the blog posts. Well, if there was a particularly relevant hot topic that people were discussing and we put out a blog post about it, it might take a while for the PR firm to approve everything. So we really couldn't wait 2 days for approval or 3 days for approval, because then it might not make sense to publish the article at all. So they gave us a lot of leeway, and we started publishing things just without approval from PR or marketing, and ultimately somebody eventually crossed the line, said something that was a little bit funny, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but that did offend some people, and PR and marketing stepped back in and required them to approve every new blog post going forward. So that can cause a lot of problems, and these short buzz cycles make it difficult to oversee and regulate what's going on with your social media at your company. So cultural transparency, I already talked a little bit about that. I won't go into that anymore right now. Low barriers to sharing, these are just some examples how easy it is to retweet things, how easy it is to share things. There are specific tools designed just to do this. And then short buzz cycles, like I said, if you wait 24 hours, your content may be irrelevant. So where do the regulations stand today? The game's begun, but it's very, very early. So FINRA and IAB have put out a little bit of documentation. But as we know, regulation never decreases. So if you look at regulation over time, it just goes up and up and up. If there's one trend that you want to bet on in the United States, it's that things are going to continually get more regulated, not less. Regulation is inevitably just a product of innovation. So here's my prediction. I think that within 3 years, companies that are required to archive their email will also be required to archive their data, contacts, and communications from each and every SaaS application that they use. This will include every post made by anyone, any organization on a social media site, account, or application. I consider social media a subset of SaaS, but I also think that SaaS tools that have internal communication systems will be particularly affected by this kind of regulation. So maybe a tool like Basecamp that has internal messaging functionality, tools like Yammer that might be private to your company. I think all that data that's communication related will have to be archived. So how can you prepare for this coming regulation? Well, there's a lot of confusion right now because there are a lot of different tools. It's hard to figure out, which tools you should be using. It's hard to figure out where these tools fall in the regulation spectrum. And it's hard to tell what exactly is a tweet, a blog post, an electronic forum, a friend, a follower. A friend on Facebook is different from a friend on Twitter because on Facebook it requires mutual following, on Twitter it does not. So even trying to draft up some language that might describe a social media compliance policy, it can still be difficult to do accurately because we see this term electronic forum a lot, and what constitutes an electronic forum is difficult to figure out. We ran into this on a personal level when we at Backupify acquired a company called Tweet Backup. So what Tweet Backup does is it backs up and archives your Twitter stream. That's all that it does. But Tweet Backup requires, in order to work, that you follow the @TweetBackup Twitter account. So hundreds of people a day sign up for this. We don't look at who signs up. And apparently WikiLeaks signed up. So WikiLeaks now, who was not following anybody on Twitter but had almost 1 million followers, had to follow one Twitter account, which was Tweet Backup. We didn't know this was going on, and at the time that Amazon kicked off WikiLeaks from their servers, and I think PayPal kicked WikiLeaks off as well, a writer at TechCrunch picked up that, hey, WikiLeaks is only following one person, and wow, it's Tweet Backup, and that's owned by Backupify. So the author wrote this story that said, hey, Backupify is the only company in the world that could direct message Julian Assange. Are they going to do it? And what would they say? And we didn't do it. We learned from the story that we were the only company in the world that could do that. So it was kind of funny. And this was published on a Sunday morning. So on a Sunday morning, I had to send a note to my investors and venture capitalists that basically said, hey, look, we've got this issue. We're starting to get reporters contact us and ask if we're going to contact WikiLeaks or if there's going to, if we're going to kick them off Backupify or kick them off Tweet Backup. We called our law firm, and as it turned out, none of us really knew if this was a legal issue or a regulated issue or not. So we had to get our law firm on the phone and have a series of calls and discussions to figure out, were we in violation of the Patriot Act or some kind of Electronic Communications Act. I mean, the government had come out and said that Julian Assange is a terrorist. Does that affect, we had to analyze our terms of service and what it means. And it was very, very confusing, for us as a company. And we live in this world, right? We back up social media day after day. So, there aren't always easy answers. And luckily for us, what happened was he got arrested the next day, and the reporters stopped calling and everything died down. And so we just sort of, never had to fully address the question, but it drove an internal process that we have now, where we've started to figure out how would we handle cases like this in the future. So if you're thinking about your own social media policies, here are your sort of 3 compliance commandments, right? You should have a compliance officer, you should have a compliance process, and you should have compliance tools. Those are the 3 best ways to make sure that you don't get burned by any future regulation or regulatory issues. So what tools can you use? The best solution is to file everything, but obviously this can lead to information overload, it's unsearchable, but it's the most common thing that we see right now. People print out screenshots of things and they file them away. Not really the best solution for an electronic communications medium. So if you look at the current state of technology, there are some companies that are emerging to help you out. Radian6, Lithium, and YakTrack are 3 companies that that we've seen that will help you monitor what's going on various social networks, what people are saying about your company or your organization. I'm sure there's a lot more out there. In terms of controlling what's going on social media, HubSpot is a good company. Hootsuite will let you manage multiple social media accounts in one place. Socialware is a social media middleware company that will help you manage, what goes out and what doesn't on your social networks. And in terms of archiving your social media data, Postini from Google will do email. Smarsh does email and has a social media section to it. I believe they do support Twitter. Obviously, Backupify, my company can help with some of this. NextPoint is a good company. Arcovi, and then LiveOffice, which is actually the leader in the email archiving space, will do some of this as well for your social media. One of the things as you evaluate these archiving tools that you need to think about is web scraping versus web APIs. So some of the companies will write a web scraper, and The advantage to using a web scraper is that it's much easier to set up, right? So if you have 200 independent financial reps that work for you who all have Twitter accounts, trying to get all those people to authenticate can be a challenge. So with a web scraper, all you have to do is you put in their Twitter URLs, and the tool will go out and it will scrape the site every day, maybe every hour, depending on your terms of service. Figure out what they've said, figure out which new tweets they need to grab, parse the HTML, and store it for you later. One of the problems with scraping, so it's easier to set up, which is the advantage. The problem is it could violate website terms of service for some social media services, so you have to be careful of that. You want to make sure you're in compliance. And then secondly, there's some data that you maybe can't get access to, like a scraper may not be able to get access to Twitter direct messages. So if you're going to go over the APIs that these services provide, now you have a different set of challenges, right? So number one, you have to get the user to authenticate. Now, they only have to authenticate once. They only have to do it the first time, and then you will get, or the tool that you use will get a unique identifier token to identify that user and access their data going forward. That token can be used to pull their data on a hourly, daily, weekly, whatever your time frame is sort of basis. You can get access to data that you can't get access to with web scraping. So you can get access to direct messages on Twitter, maybe parts of Facebook and LinkedIn that you can't get access to with scraping. The problem with APIs are, number one, if you have 200 reps again, you have to get them all to authenticate, provide their password. Now, that's done on the services server, so you don't have to store that username and password. Like we at Backupify don't have to store usernames and passwords, so that's a good safety feature. But you could also be throttled at high levels. So we have, we had some problems. If you have a large IT department and you might want to write some of this code on your own, there can be problems with certain services. Like we have an ongoing, friendly debate with Twitter, or not Twitter, Flickr about their API limitations. As we sign up a lot of companies that have, put photos out on Flickr and they want to archive those photos, and it's a lot of data to pull all those photos, particularly when you're pulling them across, 15, 20,000 accounts, and so you could sometimes get throttled. There are certain services like Salesforce that we don't yet archive for this very reason, because the throttling limits on the API don't make it feasible. So. But I think this will change going forward. I think social media services are aware of this need, and I think we'll start to offer archives that are more oriented and APIs that are more oriented for compliance. So why do you need a process? Well, Gartner estimates that by 2013, half of all companies will have been asked to produce material from social media for e-discovery needs. There are some early cases that show that some of this might happen. There was one of the most interesting ones was this Arkansas juror who tweeted something about a company that they awarded a large settlement to a plaintiff against that company. The company used the tweet as a reason to get a retrial. So if you Google Arkansas juror tweet, that story will probably come up if you're interested. The challenge is you really can't afford to do this, right? One of the things that we hear on a regular basis is managers of, we use financial reps again as an example. A manager of 100 financial reps who will say, well, I don't mind if people use Facebook, I don't mind if they use Twitter to attract clients because those tools are free, but if I'm going to have to archive this data to, and pay some decent amount of money for it, then I'm just going to ban the use of Twitter and Facebook. It obviously can get expensive, but you also can't afford not to do this, right? So this is a look at, for different industries, the gap between non-compliance and compliance by industry. Obviously, this is only if you get data subpoenaed that you don't have or are in violation of some kind of regulation. But going back to some of the early slides that we looked at about the social media explosion, the amount of access to that data, it's difficult, I think, and it's a losing battle just to ban employees from them altogether. So why do you need a compliance officer? Well, the main reason is so you're not the Jeff Skilling of the social media world. So anyway, there are three things that you should do today. The first is inventory all your social media users and activities. figure out what tools people are using, how often they're using them, what departments they're used in. These tools typically don't flow through the IT department at most companies. I would actually suggest that they do. I think the IT department and the compliance department should be responsible for drafting policies of appropriate use and monitoring the behavior of users across the social media tools. Second is investigate relevant tools. So go back to the slide that I showed earlier. Figure out what your needs are. Do you just need to monitor? Do you actually need to control and manage? Do you need to archive? There are lots of tools out on the market, and the market is growing all the time. These tools are maturing all the time, so spend some time checking them out, going through the free trials, reading the material, figure out what's appropriate for your company. And then schedule a meeting to discuss compliance at your company. Some of the companies we talk to, social media compliance is one of those things that many of the executives and many of the compliance and IT staff know needs to be done, but nobody's ever sort of taken the leadership and the directive to actually go make it happen. So I would encourage you to get that process started at your company. And with that, I'm done, so I'm happy to take any questions or comments that you may have. I think we're going to do this via chat, so if you want to send anything in the chat box, I'll be happy to respond. All right, well, it looks like there aren't any questions. So here's my Twitter ID and my email. Feel free to, if you think of anything, if you need help looking or evaluating at some different tools, I'm always happy to help. If you have any questions about materials, processes, or procedures, this is something that we think about a lot. So, feel free to reach out and contact me. And other than that, enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.